Hey everybody, JJ here. Bull boom, bear bust. It is March 10th, Tuesday. Welcome back to the channel. So another crazy day. The stock market jumped back up. Let's talk about why that happened. New bailouts announced for the oil industry, the cruise lines, the airlines. Will this save the economy? Well, the answer is no. We're going to talk about that and why. Because the debt's unpayable. America is bankrupt. The failed policies are going to continue. We'll talk about the time frame. We don't just say that the economy is going to fail. We're going to give you time frames. Also, the middle class ultimately is going to be wiped out, in my opinion. And we should prepare for Great Depression 2.0. So let's go ahead and get into it. Now, first of all, let's just recap our last video report. This video was about the U.S. housing market. And we put out there, we asked the question, will the housing market get sick in 2020? Will there be a real estate recession? Will we see falling home prices? Now, in that video, I said, no, I don't think they're going to allow the housing market to collapse. A lot of it is because of time frames, right? Do I think the housing market's going to collapse? Eventually, yes. I expect major deflation coming to the U.S. housing market, falling home prices, failing banks, and a big ugly mess. Do I think it's going to happen in 2020, which that's what the video is about? No, I don't think it's going to happen in 2020. In fact, I see prices continuing to rise. Now, the reason I mention that is because there's a lot of people that disagreed with me. I got a lot of thumbs down, but that's okay, because disagreements is where you finally get the best information. So maybe, people thought that I was talking about, forever. Like, people might think that I said the housing market's going to go up forever. No, I was talking about 2020. Right? Nothing goes up forever. There's ultimately a bursting of the bubble. It's definitely going to happen. But unlike some channels that talk about economic collapses for years and years, I try to give you time frames on this channel, get more specific. I can go back and show you lots of channels that have been calling for economic collapse for the last 4 or 5, some of them even going back 6 or 7 years. Every year saying there's going to be a recession, a meltdown, and they'll be right eventually. Right? I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying they haven't been proven right yet. But we give you time frames here. So I don't see it happening in 2020. Why? Because they can manipulate this market as much as they want to. Now, no, the Fed cannot print and put food on the shelves, right? So that still remains the biggest risk for the economy, in my opinion. If we see good shortages, which we're starting to see some now, we could see major inflation in certain goods, and especially imports. And as you probably know, we're a major consumer economy. We really don't produce much here in the U.S. So with the supply chain disruptions that we're seeing, I see that as the biggest threat. But let's talk about what happened today in the markets. The Dow Jones, the S&P, the NASDAQ, all major indexes surged today around 5%. Gold took a little bit of a hit, down 1%, so we're not seeing that safe haven buying like we expected. But we know it's beat down in the futures market and the paper market. Oil recovered today. That may be bad news if you're waiting for lower gas prices. All right, so what's going on? Did they find a cure for the sickness outbreak that's spreading across the globe, including here in the U.S.? Well, no. It was basically jawboning that the Fed's going to come in and put out more debt to do bailouts of several industries. Okay, so new bailouts announced for the oil industry, cruise lines, airlines. Let's talk about this bubble economy and the bailouts. The new bailouts being implemented, or at least being announced for now, that will ultimately be implemented. Now remember, it's going to be the banking industry again. The banks are insolvent. They're lending out many times as much money as they have in deposits. Right? So when this bubble is allowed to pop, there's going to be major insolvencies and bankruptcies for businesses, and yes, I think they're going to be bailed out again. Now what's happening right now is the population is being fooled. They're being fed the line that this is the greatest economy ever. And of course, a big part of that whole talking point from the current administration is under fire right now because of the stock markets showing major weakness. Now ultimately, I do think they're going to re-inflate the stock market, and I think they're going to do it before the end of 2020. Now remember, the plan is to use the declining stock market and this sickness outbreak as a reason for the stimulus. So now instead of looking at their policies and saying, hey, we failed, the trade war didn't work, all the debt that we issued didn't work, all the previous bailouts didn't work, All right, we're back in the same position again, back on the verge of an economic collapse. Instead of admitting all of these failed policies, they're just going to go ahead and blame the sickness outbreak, right? I think most of you understand that. But see, the bigger this bubble gets, the worse it's going to be. And it's okay. It gives us more time to prepare, right? I don't want to see the bubble get bigger because it's going to be more pain when it bursts. But look on the bright side. It gives us more time to prepare. And if you're putting away money, trying to save up for a house, and you're sick, that home prices are going to continue to rise. Well, again, in that previous video, I hate to give you that information, but that's what we see happening. Right? So that's why I put here, failed policies continue for political gain. We're in the first term right now. After the first term, I think no matter who gets elected, that's when we're going to see the collapse. Now, this is just my opinion, but it makes sense when you look at their motives that they would allow this to collapse. If a new president comes in, and then if it collapses, he can just blame it on the previous administration. And I think a big part of why the current president was put in is so he can give false confidence to Americans. And that way this economic collapse that we're going to see is going to be a much bigger wipeout of the people. And then people are going to be begging for more socialism, just like you see in all these other countries that have collapsed. And this may be a dire sounding warning or prediction, but ultimately I think that there's going to be massive poverty and famine in the United States, worse than the Great Depression. I call it Great Depression 2.0. It's going to be much worse. Remember back in the 1920s and 30s, I shouldn't say remember, but what you've read about that time frame, that time span, people were actually much more self-sufficient back then. More people grew their own food. More people hunted for their food. More people had more skills, real life skills. They were able to build houses, right? If they didn't know how to build a house themselves, they got help from their community, their friends, their neighbors. We now have more people that are dependent on the system than we had back then. So it's going to be much worse, much more starvation and sickness. I think much more dangerous times are coming our way. I mean, I've got to be honest here. That's what I see coming. All right, remember, we've got one of the best liars in the world in office right now. Right? I know this is going to put a lot of people off, but I believe he was put here to engineer this bubble and fool people into thinking that things are great. And it's very dangerous. A lot of people are not going to be prepared for what's going to happen here, right? And there's going to be a very big price to pay for people allowing the government to operate in such a reckless fashion. Endless bailouts, endless debt. Most people are too distracted with just everyday life and sports and entertainment, right? And honestly, if I had to put a number on it, I think about probably less than 1% of the population is actually prepared for what's coming. I'm not even completely prepared. Right, when this thing comes down, it's going to be game over. Now, I think they're ultimately going to go to zero rates, probably even negative before the end of the year. That's another reason why in our previous report I talked about that the housing market likely would not fall apart that quickly before the end of the year. Ultimately, yes, I expect major deflation. I expect falling home prices, stock market to collapse when they finally do pull the stimulus away. Now, I wanted to clarify this because I didn't want people to start getting complacent based on my previous video. Just because I say something's not going to fall apart in the near future doesn't mean that there's not some very bad things that are going to happen long term. Some very bad things are coming to the United States. Right? And some people say, JJ, what are you talking about? We're the world's richest nation. Well, actually not true. We're the world's largest debtor nation. Right? Just because we have the unlimited credit card where they can print or digitize as much currency as they want to, that doesn't make us rich, right? We may live like we're rich, right? We have people that never worked a day in their life, that never missed a meal because of this nice safety net we've developed, right? We have a country living on unlimited debt right now. And do you think that's really going to last forever? Or are we going to have to pay the piper someday? Well, I think you know the answer to that. Most people don't like to think about it, and most people might even think this is insane doom and gloom talk, but this is just reality. This is what's going to happen. There's going to be major turmoil and poverty that's going to be spread across the globe, including the United States. Now, is this pandemic outbreak, the scare, going to be the trigger to bring it down? Well, I think it could tilt the first domino to bring the rest of the economy down. Do I think it's going to come down this year? Well, I hope not, and I don't think so. Hopefully we still have a little more time to prepare, because again, new bailouts are being implemented, new stimulus. They're going to try to keep up all these, keep these failed industries propped up, right? Maybe we should let the airline industry fail, and then people say, no, JJ, we can't do that. People will lose their jobs. All the pilots, all the flight attendants are going to lose their job. All the screeners, the TSA people, we can't have that. Well, I mean, do we really need 1,000 planes in the air every day, right? If something cannot survive on its own without government backing, does it need to even exist? I mean, you tell me, right? I think this whole system was designed to slowly put people into more and more debt. Now look what's happening. You got most of the population living paycheck to paycheck. As long as people can watch Netflix and drink their beers, they're going to be happy, complacent. But ultimately, it's probably going to be the 1% that are going to own everything. In this next downturn, you can expect many, many people to lose their houses. Probably many more people that lost their houses in the previous housing bubble when it went bust. And we're all going to be renters. The upper 1% are going to come in and scoop up the homes. The banks will not lend when home prices drop. That way the big guys can come in and buy homes for pennies on the dollar, and they won't be outbid by somebody that's trying to get a loan, because the banks will pull back on the lending at that time when home prices are cheap. You can bet it's going to happen again. We just hope we're prepared. Thank you for watching this report. Bye for now.